And welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just, and with me today is Mr. Michael Graves. He's the at-large here for Sacramento County Libertarian Party. And joining us is the venerable Mr. Richard Fields. Thank you for joining us today, Richard. It's been a while since we've had you on. So this is not a fun show for me today. We've got a couple of topics that I do not like talking about, but sometimes we have to talk about things we don't like. So we're going to start with the school shooting in Nashville, but we're going to try and take a different tact from what most of the conversation is going about. Because from my perspective is you can take the guns out of gun violence and you're going to still end up with violence. And so for me, the question is, what is wrong with our schools? That's the one question. If this school shootings or school violence is increasing, what has changed in our schools in the last 20, 30 years that have caused that increase? We can't just ignore that school part of the equation. And it seems to me that that's the one question we're afraid to ask. And am I just off my rocker here, Michael, or is this something that is a question that's not being asked and maybe we should?
Oh, I don't think you're off your rocker. No, I think pretty much all of these, horrible, tragic school shootings in the United States of America are traceable. They're all traceable to students who, were really marginalized in some way. And I don't mean necessarily that they were, marginalized in the sense. I mean that they ended up at the margin, not that they were oppressed necessarily, but that they ended up in a. You don't go and shoot up a school if you're in a good situation. If you're successful and happy with your life. You can go read. I think it's discouraged, but you can go read those manifestos and see what those guys were thinking. And a lot of that information's out there. You got the Columbine shooters from back in the '90s. You got Cho Sung-hui, who's just bitter that he can't get a date. It really speaks to how isolated some of the youth in our communities that they aren't getting the support they need. And I am a believer that even, these people are monsters. But I believe that even monsters deserve empathy, that, something caused them to be that way.
Yeah, there's very few people who are generally born a bad seed, right? It's most mental health issues are a combination of trauma, undealt with trauma, and personality, right? It's kind of the nature plus nurture equals who you are. And if you're punishing people who have borderline personality issues of some form and you force them into an environment that doesn't work for them, then you're going to have issues at the other end. It's going to come out sideways, and at least in a certain percentage of those people. And so, Richard, is this really something new? You've been around, you've been in the news, you've been in media for a long time. Is this really something new, or is it just something that's manifesting itself differently? It's hard for us to know.
I think it's a round peg square hole story. The education system that we have today really actively started back in Germany under Bismarck. It's a education system that was designed to produce two kinds of students. One, mechanics and draftsmen and mechanical engineers, that kind of thing. People who work with their hands, people who are in the trades. The other people that were supposed to create were the intellects, the people who would go on to be lawyers and doctors and professionals. So it was a two-track system. We have a third track now, people that work with their minds, but not necessarily as professionals. We have people who are really, really good at, let's say, internet games, video games, that sort of thing, which is a big industry. There are more people that watch tournaments of video games than watch NFL football. It's an amazing factoid. But we have an industrial education system that is trying to educate people for a country that doesn't really have an industrial base anymore. We exported most of our industrial base to China years ago, and are just now gradually starting to bring it back to a certain extent. But when you have a kid who is brought into a school system and is said, okay, you can do one of two things. You can either go college prep and try to become a liberal arts major, or you can go tradesman and try to become a plumber. And they don't want to do either one. You have a bed that's ripe for, I don't know, discontent, for rebellion, for acting out. So I think that's part of it. And part of it is our social fabric has been breaking down. We have a lot less respect for patriotism. Why? Because the people who are supposed to be running the country don't give us any reason to be patriotic anymore. The idea of America is limited government and lots of personal freedom. Over the last 20 or 30 years, it's gone in the other direction. Very little personal freedom and an oppressive government telling you what you can, what you can't do, you know, at all levels. I mean, if you were going to move to California like the pioneers, like the 49ers did 150 years ago, you couldn't do it today, or 170 years ago. Couldn't do it for the simple reason that there are so many rules and regulations, in fact, that it's impossible homes, I think, would not be possible. Building a house from your own timber is, in fact, impossible. I know this from anecdotal experience. People in the real world trying to do that can't, because the county and the state regulations make it impossible. So what you've got is a situation where we're moving from a entrepreneurial society to a permission-based society, and there are a lot of people who simply don't want to take permission, and they act out.
Yeah, and as someone who managed to get through the education system, had an undiagnosed anxiety disorder. Now this is back in the 80s, 70s and 80s when I got through school. But I graduated high school with a less than 50% attendance rate. You couldn't do that today, right? Your parents would go to jail if you had a less than 50% attendance rate in school. But yet I managed to pass enough classes, get all my credits, and graduate on time with less than a 50% attendance rate. And the reason that is because you couldn't put me in a school with 1,000 other kids and expect me to be able to actually function, because it's too much noise, too much information to try to process for someone with an anxiety disorder. But we do that every day. 20% of the country has some form of anxiety disorder at some point. And we're pushing these kids through these systems that aren't designed for them. And we wonder why they're coming out sideways and failure. And so anyway, you got anything to add, Michael, before we move on?
I would really just say that the root of the problem is a failure of it's the social fabric, like Richard said, that a lot of things in our country are really great, but that there are issues where some people are just not able to connect with their communities, where they're just not getting what they need essentially from the people around them. And that's really sad, and I think that it's very clear that we could do better. I don't think that issue is the gun's fault, and I do think that a lot of these mass murderers, you can easily imagine that if they'd been caught at an earlier time, just in a compassionate way, that their interventions, I don't mean like catching, figuring out that they had a gun and going and, doing something then. I mean engaging with them and looking at them as human beings at a time when that would have made a difference.
Yeah, there's usually points where if someone was reaching out, or if someone had gotten, the help. I spent 15 years in counseling, and so I'm a big fan if people can make that more available, or just not even more available, because you can get it now dirt cheap for free on the internet. You can actually get good counseling. But if we make it accessible, that people think it's actually accessible, people don't understand how accessible mental health is. But we're going to move on and talk about another failure of our social fabric, our educational system, and mental health. Donald Trump has been indicted by a Manhattan grand jury, and this is going to cause a lot of, I don't necessarily want to say disruptions, because I don't actually think it's going to cause as much disruptions as we thought. But it is going to cause as much as people think. But it is going to cause a lot of disruptions in our news media. And I have spent here a lot of time where we have deliberately not taught Trump. So we're going to try and do this in one show so we can get it over with. So Richard, we're going to go to you. We're going to go back to I love having you here today, because we can go back to the old school old school journalist, media type person. What do you think about this whole madness that's going on these days, Richard? Just kind of an overview of this whole.
Well, under old school journalism, Trump never would have come to the forefront because under old school journalism, actual journalists, were the gatekeepers. Trump made his name by getting on Twitter and just making a whole lot of noise. Now, I don't like Trump. Trump is a vulgarian. He's a despicable human being in any moral sense that you can think of, and he is totally wrong on trade, on economics, most of it. He did do a few good things. He appointed, other than the abortion part, he appointed some good Supreme Court justices. But the thing is, Trump is somebody who is able to appeal to the lowest, and I really mean very lowest, common denominator. Think of him like Maury Povich, somebody that can appeal to, well, he did have his own TV show, The Apprentice. He's somebody that who can appeal to the people who sit home and complain because they can't get a job, because they don't want to work very hard and watch daytime TV. That's his base, and that base will continue to support him no matter what kind of outrageous things he does or says. And I suspect, I can't prove this, but I suspect that the Democrats are very, very happy to see him being a front runner for president and see him campaigning from a jail cell or something like that. I mean, that would be an ideal situation. Even quote unquote Joe Biden could win against Trump under those circumstances and do it fairly. So it's a situation where the guy is able to keep his name in the news for whatever reason, and the news media, particularly the liberal news media, plays along with it because he is the most available and the best villain that they can find to put a villainous, evil face on the Republican Party. Not that it doesn't deserve it, but he makes Republicans look even worse than they already are, and certainly makes them look bad compared to Democrats who are bad themselves. It's a soap opera without end. Days of our lives that goes on in syndication for decades, and fortunately the guy's in his 70s, so hopefully it won't last that long.
Trump is a kind of a media creation, isn't he? Well, one of the things we've done is we've always ignored kind of the conditions that created the Trump, right? Because Trump couldn't be successful without a certain set of conditions existing.
Absolutely.
Something like Trump. And then you have the media who kind of, for whatever reason, continues to keep him into the news. If people would just ignore him, he'd actually go away. But for whatever reason, the left wing and the right wing media both continue just hammer us with Trump and Trump. I don't even watch news anymore because you can't go 5 minutes without talking about that guy. And I don't want to hear it. It's not that interesting to me. It's a bunch of gobbledygook. He's a carnival barker, and he should have gone away. He should have gone away a long time ago. Am I just kind of losing my mind here, or is this notion? Because I read an interesting thing the other day that only Fox gets like 3 million people in unique viewers a night, like 3 million. That's it. And they're the big, huge heavyweights of cable news.
Right.
But that's 3 million people out of a country of what, 350 million? That's not very many. But yet we allow these news media to continue to pump up the narrative.
Lead us around by the nose.
And we end up with Trump for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yeah, James, there's a couple levels that one should analyze this from, but let's start with this media angle. And I remember, I think in 2020, I had a conversation with a good, libertarian friend of mine, and the comment basically went like this, this system that people defend, our democracy, and isn't this a great way of, deciding what, the government's going to do, and, and this is the system that gave us, Trump versus Hillary in 2016, and if you get if you just had a bunch of your friends in the room, and from your bunch of people in the room from your community, those are not the two people you would pick.
No, those are the two most hated people in
politics. This is not a. It just doesn't look just on its face. This is not a. There's something wrong here. And then, yeah, you're absolutely right. He is a media creation. He, very artfully uses the media to, kind of turns them on their head from, sometimes from what their purpose is. But yeah, I just see this and it just kind of feels like, okay, we're doing this again, right? Like, didn't they learn their lesson last time? Right? That they want to, none of this crazy stuff would have happened from the election cycle in 2016 if they had just covered things in a reasonable way. But they, it's a kind of this, if it bleeds, it leads kind of ethos that we're going to give this guy lots of attention, and then somehow he actually won, and then they didn't learn their lesson. So now they're going to go after him again, and they make a phenomenon out of him, and he's not going to, as a media phenomenon, he's not going to die quietly. And this is probably great for their ratings. It energizes, the Democratic base.
Well, it's great for fundraising for both Democrats and Republicans, right?
But from the if you're a Democrat, from the perspective of what were they saying for 4 years? This is the most. We got to get Trump out of office because this is like the the worst thing that could that's ever happened to America, and all this stuff stuff that's pretty. I see where they're coming from, but even to put it that far out there, it's a bit hard to justify. And if that's true, this is this kind of phenomenon where 2016, Hillary was basically rooting for Trump to win the primary because she thought he would be the easy one to beat, and then of course she lost to him. So they just don't seem to learn their lesson, and things are going in a very weird, sad, kind of funny direction, and.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, what really kind of gets me, what makes it really impossible for me to listen to, because I don't care, prosecute Trump all you want, but just stop claiming that the goal is here to hold people in power accountable, because none of them actually care about holding their people accountable. It's always the other guys they want to hold accountable. It's never their guys that they want to hold accountable, and so I don't believe you when you say it's about holding people accountable. It's about you want.
Along those lines, James. It brings up the interesting thought process. Trump is being charged for lying about an adulterous sexual relationship with an ex-person, lover, whatever you want to call it. I doubt that there was any love involved, but there you go. I wonder what Bill Clinton is thinking these days. Whether or not he's worried that Republicans will pull the same, a local Republican prosecutor in Arkansas or someplace will pull the same thing on him. I'm sure that there was a lot of lying and covering up going on. Of course, he's probably got the statute of limitations going for him, but who knows?
Well, there was a study, 3 felonies a day. If a prosecutor wants to put someone through a legal exam, we'll try to use some pleasant language, a legal exam, well, how many of us could actually survive it? If they really just wanted to prosecute you.
Oh, right, yeah.
There's
so many laws, you're
gonna
violating
trip
laws all the time. You don't even know about them. How could you know about them?
Right. So the fact that they found something to charge him with isn't actually surprising. It'd be more surprising if they couldn't find something, to be honest.
Right.
But does that make all of us in danger, or is the era of political prosecutions beginning?
That's a possibility. I think things are kind of spiraling slowly in that direction. So what I was going to say is that there's the other level of analysis is the political level. What is sort of the big picture here? Why is this happening? Where are things going? This is part of a trend, right? Where the dominant political factions, the left and the right, the Republicans, the Democrats, what they've been doing for many years now is throwing slowly, bit by bit, tossing decorum and a rules-based system for resolving their and our differences out the window. And that's why things keep getting, weirder and weirder. And this was going on for a while. You just had these things where, it's tit for tat. They did this to us, and now we're going to do it to them. So you had, it was like Merrick Garland, wasn't, there was a claim that on a historical basis that, you really got to nominate this guy, Obama's still the sitting president, you got to do this. Well, we're not going to do that anymore. That we're not honoring that, right? And then, so then we're getting Republicans on the Supreme Court, and then they actually, end up essentially controlling the Supreme Court. And then, then of course the response to, then we have this the abortion ruling from the Supreme Court, and then the response from the left is like, well, look what they're doing. Like we gotta pack the court. You know, what are you gonna do? Like they don't follow the rules, we can't follow the rules, right? And then we all gotta follow the filibuster. It's in the procedure. That tradition's been around for a zillion years. And then, well, all right, but now they went too far, so we're getting rid of the filibuster. And then they're gonna not respect the filibuster against us. And they're just, it's more and more no holds barred. And this is just,
it's
not even the end point, but it's the most recent, most extreme iteration where, okay, we're actually going to go after you now.
Yeah, it's the nuclear option. What used to be called the nuclear option, right? Well, we're going to remove the filibuster, and that removing the filibuster
Right.
was the nuclear option.
Nuclear
so
option,
we can get things done. But of course, getting things done means you just have less. I don't know if bipartisan is actually the wrong. You have less buy-in from the general public because you're getting smaller and smaller margins. Right.
I prefer it when the government doesn't get things done.
Yeah, the government should it should be hard to get things done because
by design.
Rather than we've got 50% plus one, so we can get stuff done. We have a mandate. No, 50% plus one is not a mandate. It means you're now representing the 100% and not just your 50%. But we have a political class that thinks their job is to represent those who voted for them, not the whole body politic. And I think that's a fundamental problem we are facing at the moment. Am I kind of wrong on that, Richard, or we've kind of gone off the rails?
All I can say is, yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, Mitt Romney has accused the New York prosecutor of stretching charges in order to fit the political agenda in the Trump indictment. Not that I particularly care what Mitt Romney says, but again, we brought it up. How much danger is our democracy in? I hate that phrase because I don't think because of political prosecutions, right? Well, are Texas prosecutors now going to go?
Mitt Romney is worried about protecting the system. If you ever want to, see establishment, Mitt Romney is his picture is next to the word in the dictionary. He is an establishmentarian from the word go. He is the embodiment of the establishment. He's just worried that he's probably too pure, and you would probably never catch Mitt Romney in an adulterous affair. But he's worried about the establishment system getting upset, and in fact, the system is getting upset when you start, going after ex-presidents for misdemeanors that are conjured up to be a felony using dubious legal reasoning. You're going to, into third world, Brazilian, Argentinian kind of politics, and that's what he's worried about. He's worried that the establishment will get a bad name, and I'm not sure the establishment deserves anything close to a good name.
Well, I got a question. But the House Republicans are now want on information from Bragg's office on the investigation. So now we have Congress investigating the investigator of the investigations. But is it all just? It's just more political.
Well, they're going to push back. They kind of have to push back, right? I mean, this is sort of like a veiled threat, right? It's like how the government, has a chilling effect on speech when they go after one, whoever it is, with Twitter or whoever, and then everybody, kind of gets the picture that, if you say these things, there's going to be consequences, right? If you go after the guy with a lot of power and you make an example of him, there's an implied threat that.
So is it an implied threat to somebody like, say, Mark Cuban? Don't bring yourself into politics because we will find a way to take you down.
It's possible, yeah.
I mean, not maybe Mark Cuban specifically, but someone of that type who could maybe, step in from the outside. Back in my day, it was Ross Perot, but is there someone like that? Is that the threat of the future? Telling people a future Trump or future someone who might want to step in from the outside, not necessarily a future Trump, but a future outsider said, no, you can't. You're going to have to play the game if you want to play the game. Is that kind of what the message they're trying to say?
Well, I think you're going to see an exacerbation of the split in the Republican Party. This has been going on for some years now. There's kind of the pro-Trump and the anti-Trump Republicans, and the establishment, Mitt Romney, Mitch McConnell, anti-Trump people probably don't care very much that Trump is being indicted. They're probably all for it, but there's some other people who are aligned with Trump, and they might be on the other side of it. Indeed, they might end up in the crosshairs of these types of actions in the future, and they're probably going to push back pretty hard to the extent that they can. And this is just the way things are going. There's just more and more political conflict. You have the political subcultures pulling away from each other, even just regionally, right? You have the abortion laws are starting to look very different in California versus Texas, so this is all kind of connected as a phenomenon of the interaction of these different political cultures.
Well, this is
I think there's a simpler explanation to what we're watching with the Trump saga, and that is this: we are a dying empire. We're looking at $1 trillion deficits as far as the eye can see. We're an empire in serious decline. These are the bread and circuses. This is the show, the diversion that's going on to keep the elites in power as long as possible, to keep the game going, the music playing just as long as possible, so that they don't have to give up their ill-gotten gains as a result of the inflation of their assets to keep the whole roadshow going. We're just looking at a surface manifestation of a very serious and deep rot in the country's political system as a whole. And if we ignore the bigger issues, the monetary issues, the economic issues, the debt issues, if we ignore those and focus on whether Trump had an affair and lied about paying to cover it up, we're missing the forest for the trees.
Well, we got like a minute and a half left, so we'll see if we can wrap this up. Is this localization? Is this fragmentation? I mean,
political fragmentation
that we're experiencing. Is this a good news for libertarians and localism? Is it, maybe not as we get through it, but if we ever come out the other end? I
think it's going to be a bumpy road. I think there's going to be a lot of problems. I think there's going to be conflict, but I do think that in conflict there is opportunity. And yes, this is an opportune moment for we as libertarians to do our parts, put our views forward. And there's a lack of political leadership. And that's the role we have to play, is to create a positive vision for an alternative to this circus. And you're exactly right, Richard. This has been going on since the 2020 election was a great example where, not that COVID wasn't real, but there was, COVID was absolutely politicized and used as a way to, we got to get Trump out and get Biden in, and I think they.
Yep, I think libertarians, we have to go local. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Richard. Okay. And please remember to love everybody, and good night.
Thank you for watching the Libertarian Counterpoint Show. In Sacramento, Channel 17 on Comcast. Each Thursday at 8 p.m. and each Monday at 5:30 p.m. for the Knuckleheads of Liberty. Also on YouTube, Facebook, and podcasts everywhere. We invite you to come again next week.